I'm turning it on.
Yeah, I see it says recorded. Yeah, continue. I'll see if I can keep playing around with this, see what's going on. Maybe I should sign off and sign on again. How's that?
Okay, why don't you? And
Yeah, why don't I do that? Yeah.
and check in your computer settings to be sure that the camera is turned on. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
all I can think.
Yeah, I'll start over again. What I did was
Meanwhile-
have, yeah, okay, there we go.
Meanwhile, the
I'll-
other George is coming in.
Hey, great.
Okay.
Hey, George.
Hi, George.
Can you hear us, George?
Not yet. Connecting.
Connecting to audio.
Now he should be on. Hello, George.
Hi,
there.
George.
Hello,
Hi.
hello.
Now, George Farrick is coming back in full splendor, we hope. It
There's a
doesn't
mute
look
on
like
your
it.
microphone.
And now he's got a mute sign on his microphone. George, unmute your mic.
Things are getting worse. Not only face.
Whoops.
Okay, let me see what's going on
Okay.
here.
You-
Huh. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can
Okay.
hear you.
Yeah, I think my camera's off. I have to go and do something
All
to
right.
turn it on. So I'll play around with it. How's that?
Sounds
Well,
good.
enjoy it.
Whatever works.
But Tom, I was really so sorry to hear of your news of that reoccurrence, and I hope it's totally successful,
Well, thank you.
the
Uh,
regimen.
I'm not sure. I don't think Fred was on that distribution, but I send out an email, and I'm also kind of going out on public media, not public, but my social media, that after 12 years following radical prostatectomy, my PSA has started going up, and they have discovered an enlarged and active lymph node. It appears to be only one, at least of the size that they can detect. So I'm going to start radiation therapy next Tuesday. And what I do want to say is I'm going to try very hard. I think they're going to be scheduling it at 1 o'clock our time here, which means for purposes of our meeting, if it does get scheduled at 1, it will not in any way interfere with our Friday mornings,
That's
Sounds
good
great.
news. Good news.
nor will it interfere with the Tuesday morning. I think some of you at least are aware that, on Tuesday, I've got a Coffee with Father Tom
Yeah.
program or meeting or whatever. We do, the way it works is there's a team which now has about 10 or so people on it, of whom a few will come on early on FaceTime, on Zoom, and then we chat a little bit and warm up, and then at 9 o'clock, we go on to Facebook Live for what I aimed at a half hour, but it usually goes to about 45 or 50 minutes now. And it's been kind of a freewheeling conversation. But
Well, Tom, but the truth is we're more fun, right?
in certain ways, yes.
That was a cryptic answer.
In
Yeah,
certain
good
other
hook,
ways,
George.
in other ways, it's interesting that all of those members of that team who chat with me are all women who were formerly associated, well, some still are, but were formerly associated with me at Our Lady of Assumption in Claremont.
Oh,
Ah,
There
Wow.
is one newly newly arrived member of the team, John Crean, who is a retired Episcopal priest. In fact, he is a retired Episcopal canon, which he says is the Episcopal equivalent to a Monsignor.
Ah,
And what's interesting is he's a very interesting fellow. He's not terribly conservative, but he is quite high church, probably more high church than any of us are. When
And
he
that's
comes on,
mostly of liturgy, doesn't it?
it does liturgy and other, shall we say, institutional formalities and niceties.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Besides
sort of like he's probably more comfortable. He'd probably be more comfortable in the Queen's Court than, let's say, at a small progressive parish in East LA.
So he's a liberal, but high church.
He's I would say he's a little bit
Progressive.
left leaning. At least, you know, he's got a bit of a passion for social justice and the various inclusivities that tend to be controversial parts of religious dialogue. Or
John Luce, Ned, was as high church as you could get, right?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
We had a very wonderful Episcopalian priest who preached at our wedding, Darlene's and mine, and he started the Brown Berets in East Los Angeles, and supported many a radical kind of movement.
He was a Sololinsky product. John
Oh, yeah.
Luce was, yeah. George, are you still on the line?
Yeah, uh-huh.
What is an Anglo-Catholic?
I think that's a more conservative high church Catholic who maybe doesn't believe in women bishops and gay relationships. I think a lot of the African Anglicans would be in that category. And so there's some Anglican churches here or Episcopalian churches that identify with that don't agree with some of the mainline, you know, Bishop Curry, Michael Curry.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, wonderful preacher, wonderful. So I don't think they would go along with maybe him being their leader, but so forth. So they're kind of against certain progressive movements in the overall Episcopal Church. Fred, do you have any beat on that from your
Yeah, I
connection?
do. They are conservative Anglicans who started off in Newman's movement of the Tractarians. And part of Newman's emphasis was on smells and bells in the liturgy, as they say. But the other thing is when the Anglican in Oxford and Cambridge stopped being basically seminaries, the Anglican Church, the Anglo-Catholic Church retreated to inner cities. And they had a very strong emphasis on social justice. In fact, they are the first targets of the term red Tories. So they were high church with regard to doctrine and smells and bells, but very, very liberal, very, very radical. And they in the inner cities, they would have urchins, city urchins serving the masses and so forth and so on. Many of them going on for ordination. With that same combination of radicality and conservatism with regard to liturgy and doctrine, which in a way sounds pretty Catholic
Yeah.
Mhm.
in our way of thinking. And so I think that continues today, but I think George is right, that at least in Africa, they are opposed to female priests and so forth. But I know in the United States, the Anglo-Catholic Church has plenty of female priests.
Hmm,
So that
But do they have women bishops?
yes. Oh no, the regular Anglican Church does, but I don't know whether
Yeah.
the regular Episcopal Church does, but I don't think the Anglo-Catholic.
Yeah.
there was a,
John Crean's wife was also a retired deacon.
Oh,
And
right.
I forget what parish they were, she was associated with. John himself was kind of a roving priest who would fill in for various needs. And he also, yeah, I think he was very close to the late John Bruno.
One thing there was a famous Benedictine liturgical scholar whose book I read, and he said there's kind of a correlation between people who have a devotion to the Eucharist and who are also interested in social justice.
huh,
Oh,
is
yeah.
that so?
And that was key. That was part of the key to the Anglo-Catholic interest in social justice.
Well, the American liturgical movement, as I think you are aware, was very, in its beginnings in the 1930s with Virgil Michael,
Yes.
was very, very well, closely connected to the social justice movement of that time.
Well, yeah, that's
And
true.
the origins of their journal Worship, called Orate Fratres at that time, had a lot of articles unfolding that.
I first met Dan Berrigan at a liturgical conference in
Uh-huh.
Seattle. So he felt right at home, I know.
Uh,
And he was talking about the importance of symbolic actions, which in some ways is epitomized by the nonviolent resistance with Martin Luther King and so forth, and in the busing and cafeteria sit-ins and so forth. Interesting.
I'm sorry,
No, please.
not to get too, not to get back into our transubstantiation dialogue. But
I'm
know,
all for it, but not yet, Lord, not yet.
yeah, right. Thank you, Gus. My whole idea of recognizing the Eucharist as symbol, part of the authenticity of the Eucharist depends on the authenticity of the symbol. And the symbol has to include the fullness of how that symbol works within the human community. So equality around the table is, if you don't, I mean, this is right out of 1 Corinthians. If you don't have equality around the table, you do not have an authentic Eucharist.
Mm.
And if you, and equality around the table means equality in every other aspect of life. You can't divorce your, when you bless yourself with holy water in entering the church, you're not divorcing yourself from the rest of your life. So, Eucharist has to be intimately connected, intrinsically, I would say, connected to the whole constellation of things that we would classify under social justice.
You've just triggered a thought in my mind, and that is whoever created the system in the series Blue Bloods and the family meal
Yeah.
is always part of every episode. I just wonder if there's a spirituality involved in that. That would be an interesting insight.
Yeah, there may be. I don't know.
Well, I just wish they teach the kids how to make the sign of the cross.
Hey, I'm glad they just work at it. They don't have to be
Yeah.
high church.
Are you high church if you make the sign of the, you have a blessing before meals in a Catholic family week after week after week, and you finally get the sign of the cross right? instead
Well,
of
why
this-
don't you send them a message, George?
Well, I don't think they care what I think. It's a good show.
Perhaps, yeah.
That's a great show, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
Did we
you
lose Ferrick?
could make your message a little bit threatening the way that lawyers are very skilled at doing.
Wow. You better quit mocking the sign of the cross, or we're coming, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fred, did you speaking of the Anglican, there was an archbishop in Britain, a famous man, but I don't know his name. I can't think of it. He knew Bonhoeffer in the ecumenical movement in the late 30s.
Yeah,
What?
George Bell.
George who?
Another Bell.
Yes. Did you know him?
Another famous George. No, I didn't. Since I'm a youngster.
Well, he lived to be an old man, so you.
Yes. But I didn't know.
Yeah, I wonder if Herbert did, but we'll never know. A famous guy. I mean, he questioned the bombing, the Allied bombing of the saturation bombing of Germany
Right.
vigorously, and was posthumously cleared recently of pedophilia allegations. And was a good friend of Bonhoeffer's. I mean, if I recall, Bonhoeffer's family found out he had been killed when the Brits broadcast a memorial service. And I think this Bell was presiding, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway.
Somewhere in the late 30s, Bonhoeffer came to the US for a while and was very touched with an inner city. I think it was a Black community. Their
Absolutely.
joyful liturgy really struck a bell with him, did it not?
Yeah.
He took back a bunch of records of Black worship music to Germany. Sure, that went over well in the Third Reich. The church was the Adam Clayton Powell was the pastor of it during the 50s. Remember Adam Clayton Powell?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
It was that church. I can't remember the name of it. The word Abyssinian shows up in the title, but I can't remember what else. Fred, I have another sort of quasi-ecumenical question. I have stumbled across a woman who died in the Holocaust, so to speak. I've stumbled across books about her, a Dutch Jew whose name was Etty Hillesum.
Right.
Do you know anything about her?
Pretty much what you know.
Okay.
Welcome
You're-
back, George Ferrick.
Hey, good to see you.
Hey,
Here's George on his iPhone.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, I'm restarting my computer. I think there was some update that, you know how these computers have a life of their own and
Yeah.
they're updating things. So I had to stop it and restart it. So I'll try to get in via my computer.
Well, you know, for our purposes, you may not see us all that well on the iPhone, but your iPhone camera is much better than the computer camera.
Yeah, it's very, very
So you've
clear,
got a perfect image.
high def.
Oh, well, I'd rather have a fuzzy image.
Ah,
So I'm going to go back to the computer.
whatever works, George.
Yeah.
Okay. But for now, I'll stay here. Yeah.
Going back to your baseball comment earlier, John,
Yes.
Tom kindly sent me Ted Howard's book, which he photocopied completely for me.
Oh, yeah.
And in there, you are portrayed as a slugger.
I have to tell you, well, we had great fun last night because I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, George Crook and I were on the phone before I started a slow pitch softball game, over 75 age group in Fullerton. And George, do you remember you asked me, Johnny, are you still playing shortstop? And I said, no, I'm now right field. And Johnny, are you still the fastest runner on the team? And I said, no, they sometimes put in a pinch runner for me.
Yeah.
Now we have two George Ferricks.
Oh, look at you.
Well, I'm all for two George Ferricks. That'll be, the world will be far a better place, you know?
It's still a pretty high def, George.
It's still, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Unmute yourself.
There you go. I'm unmuted and also,
There you go. So
okay.
just to finish about the book, Fred, Ted Howard and I were good friends from right away in 9th grade. And he and Barney Gatlin were very close. And who else? George? Ned?
Tom Moran.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Well,
so we got high priority in Teddy's book.
So did Tom Horan.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
and whose shrine Ted worshipped. Not alone.
Not alone.
Yeah, I was a great Tom Horan fan.
When Tom
Yeah,
Horan- No, please go ahead, George.
well, I'm sorry. I read the first, I think, 2 chapters of Berryman's memoirs, and since we've met, and it's a lot like Ted's in many ways, without the bitterness of Ted. You know, the thing I don't like about Teddy's thing is the gaudium that he wallows in when, and then this guy did this, you know, repeatedly, by golly, and he's showing his ex-Catholicism, I think,
I agree.
a bit much. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah. It's an interesting combination of sort of an anti-clerical ex-Catholicism
Yes.
mixed with a very fond nostalgia.
yeah, exactly,
That's
exactly.
Good call. Yeah.
Well, Mr.
Very well put.
Is that called a bipolar?
You can analyze that, but you know,
No, schizophrenia.
sometimes it's good just to kind of glory in contradictions
Yeah.
and let contradictions speak for themselves without necessarily having to resolve every damn thing.
Like
That's right.
lawyers tend to do.
What kind of a Catholic priest are you, Welbers?
A retired, a happily
Retired one.
retired one. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Who
Tom
can also appreciate many of the
Thank you,
church
Bart.
structures from which, of course, I receive a pension, but at a distance.
Whom do you receive a pension from?
The church?
Oh. Were you an Air Force chaplain for a
No,
while?
no, 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 no.
I'm
No.
confusing you with who? Dodson?
Mike
Mike Collins,
Collins, yeah.
Oh,
perhaps Mike Collins.
Speaking of that,
Niall
George,
O'Leary was another one.
hmm.
Tom, some of my Rome colleagues have gotten into being chaplains on cruises, traveling around the world and making a living off of that. Have you ever considered that?
I
Being-
have never, the thought of a cruise just so totally turns me off. I'm not, the only kind of cruise that I think that I would enjoy doing would be something like an archaeological, historical river cruise in Europe. That would be fun. But that's usually a small group. But you know,
Yeah.
this whole idea of these floating mega hotels that become you know,
Somehow
long-term super
escaped.
spreader events for any bug that happens to be going around.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've somehow escaped from Las Vegas and gotten onto the ocean, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
You got to do
no,
the shows and
and the
gambling.
other thing is, you know, there was a very infamous Neville Rucker who spent half of his priestly, quote, half of his priestly ministry, quote, ministry, chaplain in cruises, and it's kind of been revealed the other half of it was in bed with a variety of people.
Mammals.
Yes, but you know, it's interesting. I think in almost any priest gathering, Neville Rucker would wander around trying to recruit priests for that cruise ship.
For something.
Well, he would recruit priests for the cruise ship chaplaincy. He would, and I'm sure he recruited other people in other gatherings. But
He was a curate at my first parish. St. And his sermons always began with great stories. I don't know where he got them all, but they were a good way to get going on the sermon.
Yeah, good.
But I served his mass many, many times.
And I know there are some people who are quite dedicated to him, who you know, feel that he has been unjustly dealt with.
Unjustly, but repeatedly accused, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I just, obviously some of my bias is coming out. I never really, I don't know. I always thought the guy was a phony. But I never served with him. I never, you know, was close to him in any capacity.
Well, you know, a cruise, you know, the only time I've ever been on a ship was, Fred, the USS Constitution going to Rome. Is that the one you took?
No, mine was in the Italian line.
Okay.
Which one was yours, Fred?
Yeah, mine was the USS Constitution, but
Yeah.
Fred,
What are you trying? That's a sailboat sitting in Boston Harbor, George.
no, it
Isn't it?
isn't. Not.
An old
Maybe that was
frigate.
maybe that's the original one. Yeah.
I went over in 72 on the Michelangelo. What was your Italian ship?
I can't remember the name.
Oh my.
Sorry.
Yeah, the Michelangelo sounds too grandiose for Rome seminarians. Yeah.
Well, Hawks approved it.
Oh, surprise.
You know, it was a real surprise because he at first wasn't going to, and then he approved it. Helmut Hefner and I went over together.
Oh, really?
And it was a neat experience, except you can probably identify with this, Fred. The problem with going from New York to Naples is that you lose an hour every night. So your days turn out to be 23-hour days for 5 days. And that didn't seem too bad, except that the chaplain on board, Italian, of course, he knew his thing well enough to identify us priests immediately and asked if we could take the morning mass every day. The problem was, 7 o'clock seemed to be an okay time.
Yeah, but it was really
So it
6.
used to be
Then 6
five-
Then it
and
became
5
6 o'clock,
and
then 5, 4, 3. And Helmut survived that. I did not. I don't think I survived more than 2 days on that early morning mass schedule, but he survived the whole thing. God bless him.
Helmut is the weekend supply priest in our parish
Hmm.
here in Glendale. He, a good guy. I got a Pat Zeman story. We had a
Is that an
pastor
alert for sensitive people or what?
Now, should we close our ears or?
I don't know.
proper sign of the cross, George.
Right, exercise it.
Get
If you
hyper.
if you have tears, be prepared to shed them now, I guess is what I'm really saying. But our former pastor here is kind of under a cloud. And he was a guy that spent 13 years in Rome as a translator for John Paul. But anyway, stupid circumstance here, but he is on a leave of absence and has published a memoir. And in the memoir, there are 2 chapters two incidents, I'm sorry, where Zeman comes up to St. John's when Monsignor Zach, the former pastor, was still a seminarian. And Pat was the spiritual director at Queen of Angels and tries to seduce him, described somewhat graphically. And just, I've never gotten over the fall of Pat Zeman because I liked him and I admired him and I thought he was a good priest. And we talked about it, right? He was the perfect seminarian, of course, which maybe should have told us something. I don't know, but
Well, I was a great friend of Pat's, and he sent me a Christmas card till the end of his life from Arizona, from which he was banned after he was banished from Santa Rosa.
He did me too.
And he also,
Same here.
when my daughter was studying in Santa Barbara and had tooth problems, I told her to get in contact with him, and he recommended a good dentist. So that was my last very personal contact with Pat.
Yeah.
I was a friend of the Zemans. Was there very often. And in the last years before I left for Rome, that was very, very saddened by the state of his family. And of course, it was his mother was, as you know, is it Al Scott or Joe Scott?
Joe Scott.
Those guys.
Yeah. And then father was a Superior Court judge whose courts both went in the psychiatric ward and also in the Superior Court. I visited more than once. And we had a close relationship. but his older brother, by the time I knew him, was already out in a place next to the pool because he couldn't really come in anymore. He was a discredited person. His older brother, Joe, you may remember, was in the seminary with us
I do remember him.
and went to Santa Clara. And the last I heard of him, he volunteered to go to or was drafted, I can't remember which, to the Vietnam War, which he did, but I don't know what happened to him thereafter. But anyway,
And
it was
this other brother, Fred, was like banned from the house? Or I didn't understand that.
his name was John. I think at Santa Clara, he learned how to be an alcoholic and just never bounced back from that.
Hmm.
And it was so more and more. And then before I left, Pat was saying that his younger sister had a child out of wedlock and so forth and so on. It was a family that was in disrepair. So it was but then reading Dad's description was what an awful memory to have brought back.
Hmm.
And I had the same impression of him as George did. We worked together for Father Rowan up in Carpinteria for many summers.
Yes. I
And
did.
and Rowan was a salt of the earth priest,
Absolutely.
and just he loved that. He came one time to Boston, and men talked about Pat lovingly as Bishop Pat, and so just it just seems so incredible to hear what was redescribed by Ted Howard in that the enigma of
What perfect word.
That's a great
Yeah,
word.
yeah.
Because I don't know if I told you guys this before, but when I was getting my first marriage annulled finally, Pat volunteered to be my quote advocate, and he was over here one day at my house, and we were talking about circumstances of my life in the seminary and my development and all that, and all the immaturities that led to an excuse for an annulment. And I remember Pat saying with great earnestness, yeah, George, when we were in the seminary, our psychosexual development was really hindered, and we were just very immature, and it was the spirit of the time in the church, and we just weren't dealing with that type of thing. And boy, we sure weren't, Pat, it was, I don't know. But so Fred, you too thought he was a great priest and a great seminarian.
thought he would be, yes.
See, and Ned and I don't know about John. John, did you keep up with him after he was ordained any?
Not much, but I got a lot of feedback from my younger siblings who went to Pius X, and Pat frequently spoke at youth gatherings, and they loved him. They just adored him.
Yeah, I had some contact with him, when I was director of campus ministry, and he was in Santa Barbara, and the St. Mark's University Center up there, they had very, very good relations with him. And so, it was all very, very positive.
Tom, I remember the priest retreats annual retreats that we would go to up at St. John's Theology. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
I just have one little anecdote. Pat Zeman was a speaker at one of those, and he made some comment about classmates of his leaving, either leaving the priesthood or leaving beforehand. He said they were attracted to the security of the laity. And my jaw just dropped. I just said, what? Because, to me, I was in touch with people who were struggling, single mothers in the parish and all kinds of, so I couldn't believe that he would say something like that, because I thought, well, nobody's more secure than the priest who has a house forever during the rest of his life and a guaranteed salary, et cetera, et cetera. So I knew that there is, when I heard him say that, I kind of felt a disconnect, kind of a dissonance, because I too saw him as like the perfect, seminarian and a very pious thing. And I also have one comment. I don't want to make it, but I guess I should, about Father Rowan, because I saw him the same way you did, but I bumped into a nun who said she was from a parish, that Frank Rowan was at after the last parish he was at. And I mentioned what a great priest he was. And she said, oh no, well, there was a real problem with him, because in our parish, there was an associate who was suspected of having sexual relationships, inappropriate sexual things. And Father Rowan would hear none of it. He would not want to even consider that could be happening. And I thought to myself, wow, it just kind of struck me as a syndrome of people in the institution who found it very difficult to conceive of colleagues going off the rail. But apparently Father Rowan and this nuns thing was kind of blind to that, or did not support looking into it. So I was really kind of shocked to hear that.
well, I kind of think that that's
I'm not.
very much a part of the ongoing clerical culture. Even
Sure.
the best priests within it were still part of an ongoing clerical culture that was protective of the
Right.
fraternity, the priestly
Dis-
fraternity.
Yeah, disbelieving of any
Yeah.
wrongdoing. Yeah.
Did you guys know Monsignor Healy?
Yeah,
First director of the diaconate program.
right. I worked with him when he began the diaconate program.
I can't think of his first name.
Peter.
Peter.
He was also one of my predecessors as pastor of
Good Shepherd.
Good Shepherd.
That's when I met him. I was officed near there and would go to mass during the week and
Yeah.
so forth. And he was, Fred, you did not know him?
Not that I can recall.
Yeah, very traditionally holy priest, pious, a very bright guy. And Herbert used to help out on weekends at Good Shepherd when Peter Healy was the pastor. So Herbert really admired Healy, just big time, hugely. And in fact, I once took Father Healy, who was stationed after Beverly Hills, next door to here in Burbank. I took him down to visit Herbert, and to the great gratitude of both of them, because Peter Healy wasn't driving anymore. And we went to a movie. I don't remember what it was, but anyway. But I came walking into, it was Holy Thursday in 2002 in Burbank, St. Robert Bellarmine. And it was just at the worst of the scandals. It was just, the shit hit the fan about the spring of 2002, which,
Right.
And here we were in Holy Week in the thick of it. And Monsignor Healy stood up there and went on and on about how in every parish in Southern California, a great priest had built the parish, faithful to his duties, and he had sort of a sing-songy way of preaching,
Yeah.
and deep in the Lord and faithful in every way, and loving his people. And then that priest was replaced by another priest, for generation after generation after generation, and it was all, you could see he was taken aback by the scandal and didn't much believe it, at least as of then.
Mhm.
And I remember he upset me so much, I childishly didn't go to church for the next 3 months. It just so impacted me, the way he was handling it. I mean, doesn't show a lot of maturity on my part, but shows a lot of naivete on his part, I think.
Mhm.
Tom,
You know,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if part of what George is describing was protecting the image, not necessarily that he personally was denying all of this, but that he felt so obligated to protect the image of Holy Mother Church. Tom?
no,
Yeah, well, I personally would suspect so. I
I
mean,
would
the
too.
reason why he was, and I thought he was very good in the way that he set up and organized the beginnings of the diaconate program, in part because I was selected as one of the teachers.
Well, that shows good judgment on
That
his
feels good.
part.
Well, actually, what he did was, he got Eberhard to set up the curriculum and get the teachers. And Eberhard, for whatever reason, asked me to do the liturgy part of the program, which I thought was really good. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but one of the things that I would always say when I was beginning my classes in the first class, Eberhard was always there at every single class. So
Mhm.
twice a week, he drove in to Immaculate Conception for those classes from Camarillo. And he would sit there and back in his usual pose where you couldn't really tell if he was awake or asleep. And I would always comment that, I have a very unique opportunity here, because for 5 years at least, I would sleep during Father Eberhard's classes.
Right after
Now-
lunch, right?
Now he could return the compliment, and he always kind of chuckled.
Well, I'm going to hijack.
But not yet, Judge. I just said another matter of just nostalgia.
But back
Um,
on, wait, back on Peter Healy, his reputation at Good Shepherd was, he was simply kind of a recluse. Nobody really had anything good or bad to say about him. They gushed,
People thought he was holy, did they not?
yeah, but he kept very much to himself. And what's one interesting little anecdote is when he died, the pastor of St. Robert Bellarmine called me and said they found in his room this huge, very well done watercolor picture of Good Shepherd Church that apparently was hanging on his wall. And I asked around, I went up there and picked it up. It was almost too big. In fact, it was too big for my car.
Oh
I
my
had to get
gosh.
somebody with a truck to go and bring it back, and it's now hanging in the social hall. But nobody at Good Shepherd knew anything about that picture. They had never seen it. And, and
Did
it-
he-
apparently it was hanging in Healy's room at Good Shepherd.
Was
Nobody
it
knew
he
about
that had painted it?
No, he didn't.
Oh.
But the date on it was, I think, during his time. So it wasn't something that was done afterwards.
Yeah, I liked the guy. I just happened to know what happened to him through Herbert, who was, you know, going there every weekend and was a friend. There was a millionaire in the parish who was from Australia, Tom, and belonged to some international organization of rich people that fostered Eucharistic devotion. I can visualize the guy, kind of tall and white-haired and thin. Anyway, there had been two collection counters after a Sunday mass who had disappeared with the proceeds all of a sudden. And Monsignor Healy apparently freaked and took the position that, well, something must have happened, but they'll be bringing the money back tomorrow, or surely, or the day after that. And this guy decided, I don't know how he knew about all this, that Monsignor Healy was being very derelict and maybe corrupt, and went and saw Cardinal Roger Michael Mahony. And Mahony, according to Herbert, without a hearing, without an interview, without anything, fired Healy as the pastor just from one day to the next. And it was, I think he, you know, to go stay at the Passionist Monastery, I think, or maybe it was, I don't know, I don't remember. But according to Herbert, Monsignor Healy was just crushed, you know, at the whole thing.
And now that you
And-
mention that, I think I did hear something about that. It was somewhere in the background of my consciousness. As Good
Yeah.
Shepherd, yeah.
Well, it's no way to treat a guy like Healy, you know.
No,
Who-
no.
Whatever
I
he
admired
was.
him. I enjoyed him
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. John, I just got to say one last thing, and then I'll shut up and we can get to mentorhood.
One more thing,
Yes.
George.
Say what?
Did you say
One
one
more.
more thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Guess who Phil Berryman's spiritual director was at St. John's Seminary?
I'm guessing Eberhard.
Wrong. I'll give you a hint. He was born in a nation other than the United States of America. Not the island of Britain, so not the famous Dr. Bob.
Was he born in Germany, George?
No, but you're warm. You're very warm.
Austria.
No,
No,
now you're colder.
no.
Was it
Father
Dutch?
De Vries.
De Vries. Oh my God.
my. Oh my.
I was, you know, he was in the back of my mind. I was going to say Netherlands, but
That would have been, yes, you know, and that would have left what, Williamson and De Vries, right?
yeah,
I can't imagine having Father De Vries as my spiritual director. I liked him. Thought he was learned.
yeah.
So,
Boss would call a sweetheart.
a what, Fred? A sweetheart?
A sweetheart.
Yeah.
Sweetheart.
Mhm.
Anyway, I don't know why I thought that was so interesting, but it just, I did. Okay, John. I'm done.
Oh, I just, when we spoke of Eberhard, I had Eberhard in a particular category of mentors for me. Seminary mentors, Ed Brennan, Charlie Barr, and Newman Eberhart. And Eberhart, I just thought spirituality all the way. He just seemed such a role model of spirituality. And probably 20 years ago or so, I went to visit St. John Seminary and got maybe a half an hour with Charlie Miller and about a half an hour with Newman Eberhart. And Eberhart said, and Fred, you might really enjoy this, your class and our class, in his opinion, were the best balance of spirituality and social awareness. After us, it felt like they went too far on social and were lacking on the spirituality. And before us, too much on church, call it high church if you will, and not enough aware of social justice. But Eberhart voiced that opinion. I didn't solicit anything from him. Fred, you had a sense of that?
No, I didn't. And I also wouldn't have expected to have made that kind of comparison. So I think that was wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where I determined what a big Dodger fan or baseball fan Charlie Miller was, because he took me to his room and it was full of memorabilia. So I called up Charlie Blaney, who wasn't aware of that. And Blaney by that time was head of minor league operations for the Dodgers. He immediately got season tickets or box seat tickets. And I think it was the last 4 years of Charlie Miller's life, he got to see lots of Blaney and Dodger games and took priests and family members. God bless Blaney. He really stepped up on that. Because I think Charlie, didn't he get cancer and die maybe 15 years ago or something like that?
May have been.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm all ears about mentors. I put two categories. One was mentors, lifestyle mentors, and the other was specific, like seminary, the insurance industry, the franchise industry, which would be more short-term mentoring as opposed to life mentoring. But talk to me, guys.
Well, I'm going to start because I don't think I've talked too much about mentors in my life. You have, John, George, and Ned, all of you have. I would say there are two that really, really stand out for me. And one would be lifestyle, and the other would be sort of, quote, professional, vocational, whatever. The person who first comes to my mind as far as somebody that I have referred to as mentor at a significant part of my life was Sister Cecilia Louise Moore. She was the former CSJ, who was the former president of Mount St. Mary's College, and then Mahoney tapped her to be the, I think, chancellor. And then, yeah,
I remember her very well.
Yeah. And she was the director, the secretariat director for education. So when I was in campus ministry, which was really a total of 11 years, part Cal State Long Beach and part diocesan director, she was the boss. And I don't think I've ever worked with or for somebody who was as conscious of the people that she was serving, who basically were the people that she was managing as she was. And, she just taught me a great deal about how to lead and how to manage and balance the two in what would be essentially a position where both leadership and management are important. And she was the one who encouraged me to pursue a degree, a doctorate degree, which I never got. I was an ABD at Pepperdine in institutional management. And that, I think, was a real turning point from my parish pastoral experience through the world of kind of church administration with pastoral ramifications, and then into pastorate at Our Lady of Assumption following Bill Berry. And she was really a transitional mentor for me. The other one I would say is John McAnulty, the Jesuit at the who founded the Cardinal Manning Priest's House of Prayer. I got to know him in Rome in 1976 when he was studying spirituality in order to come to LA to found that House of Prayer. And we became close friends, and then he became my spiritual director for the rest of his life, which was, until the 2000s. And I would say, as spiritual director, he was very much mentor and guide for my sorting through some rather touchy and difficult parts of my own life. And his successor, Jack Stager, diocesan priest a few years behind us, has followed very beautifully in his footsteps in that regard for me. Two more. One was John Danaher. A very important, he and I got along very, very well in his time when we intersected. He was, I think he was rector of the seminary for our last 2 years.
Yeah.
St. John's, and a real breath of fresh air after Keneally.
Yeah.
And he remained for about 2 or 3 years my spiritual director, and he helped to see me through a very, very difficult first assignment with Frank Osborne,
Good for him.
who was Osborne was one of the 2 or 3 priests at that time, pastors at that time, who had the reputation of chewing up associates and spitting them out. Bill Vanderay was one of those before.
And how long were you there,
I
Tom?
was there for 4 years.
Okay. Well,
Now, the other priest at that time, who was priest in residence at Our Lady of Grace in Encino, was Holy Ghost priest, Father Sean Byron. His sister was principal of Louisville High School, and he had been a missionary in Nigeria and was on vacation when the Igbo War broke out and he could not go back. So he found refuge at Our Lady of Grace. And, he was a very calming and steadfast spiritual experience for me there in trying to sort through the issues that were coming up because of Osborne and my introduction to priestly ministry, which was not necessarily a positive one with Osborne. So that describes mine, the ones that I came up with.
Thank you.
Tom, who was, if you know, who was deciding where newly ordained priests would be going? Was that
Of course I know. Benjamin Hawks, alone.
Alone?
Well, I'm sure that he had his trusted consultors, you know, the kind of consultor, the yes men type of consultors. But yeah, in fact, there was an interesting occurrence the second year in my time at Our Lady of Grace with Osborne, when I get a call from Ben Hawks wanting me to go to Oxnard to Joe Sharp. Now, Sharp had driven out of the priesthood, and I think in one instance, driven out of this life, almost every associate that had been assigned to him.
Wow.
And he was, you know, demanding an assistant. And Hawks basically said, you know, you are going to be his last chance. We have looked at the records of newly ordained priests, and you are one of those who got the highest recommendation from St. John Seminary faculty. And we are going to send you to him. And if you don't make it, we are simply going to tell him you're not getting anybody else.
Wait a minute, this is you, Tom?
Pardon? That was me. Yeah, that's what he said to me. You know, he was very upfront.
So your experience with Osborne yielded this appointment to Sharp.
Yeah, well, you know, Osborne was another question. It was sort of like being asked to jump out of the frying pan into the fire. But Hawks was very upfront that I was to be his personal sacrificial lamb to Joe Sharp, that, you know, if he ruins me, he's not going to get anybody else.
So Tom, what was your subjective, internal, emotional response to that?
Well, my subjective emotional response is the hell you say. Because he was a very docile, obedient, you know, young seminarian and priest. But what I did say was, you know, I can't give you an answer now. I need to consult with my spiritual director, which I knew he could not assail. He said, well, you know, that's very irregular, and I'll have to check with His Eminence Cardinal McIntyre to see if he approves of that. And, you know, McIntyre approved of my having a day to make the decision to check with my spiritual director. So I drove up to Camarillo and chatted with John Danaher. And, you know, he gave very good advice. He says, you know, if you're going, you have to take it if they play the obedience card. You know, if they place you under obedience, you probably had better take it, but, you know, get yourself some kind of a spiritual release valve, so that you're not dealing with this alone. You know, he sort of said, it's not far from here. If you need to come up here to the seminary at any time and get some support or whatever, feel free. But he said, you know, you can simply say, if you put me under obedience, I'll take it. But if I have my choice, I decline. And I went around to a couple of other neighboring parishes and got a little more insight into how absolutely screwy and crazy Joe Sharp was. So the next day I called Hawks and I said, you know, respectfully, if you put me under obedience, I'll go. But if I have any choice in it, I decline. And he said, well, you're making things much more difficult for me, but I'm not going to force you. And hung up.
Mm.
Simply
Thank
hung up.
Thank God, John.
John, do you remember him when he was principal of Pius X?
Well, O'Toole gave me quite a bit of feedback that he was sure glad when Sharp left. But I think most of the student body had no positive reaction to Sharp.
Mhm.
He was superintendent of schools too, right?
I don't know that.
It may have been.
And his brother, he had a brother who was a Vincentian,
Vincentian, yeah.
who gave us a retreat, I think when we were sophomores in high school. That was
Something like
just,
that. I vaguely remember.
yeah, beloved.
that.
Everybody fell in love with it. It was
Yeah.
just a kind old priest. Remember him? He was just so,
Yeah.
so it was a great retreat.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my little addendum to the mentor story.
Mhm.
Good for you.
Yeah, I thank goodness for Father Danaher.
Yeah. He was, he you know, and to be really honest, I don't know why. I hope that there's not some experience lurking behind this, but until Ted Howard in his book brought him up, I have no recollection whatsoever of his brother, Ed Danaher, you know, except that he wore very strange glasses.
And used to post on the back door of the seminary chapel at Queen of Angels every day a list of the indulgences that were available that day and what you had to do to get them. Remember?
Wow.
Nobody told me about those.
Yeah,
You
I vaguely remember. You know, at that point, I was not terribly interested in indulgences.
Well,
Certainly not the-
Sophomore
they
in
were
high-
on the back door of the chapel, George. Taped on it or something. If you can imagine, you know.
Your mention of the Puritan priest reminds me of an Irish author who wrote a biography of Edmund Burke. But he was a statesman. He was a diplomat who was stationed in Nigeria at the time of the Igbo uprising, or a little afterwards, perhaps. And he said the Puritans really were part of the inspiration for that. And so after the thing was all over, the Igbo part of Nigeria, when they made it the sign of the cross, they said, in the name of the Father and of the Son, and that was it. No spirit, no Holy
Oh
Spirit.
my!
I think that
Well, when I knew Sean, they had not yet given up the ghost. You know,
yes.
he was not a spirit, and he was a Holy Ghost father.
Oh yeah.
You know, that was
Same
also
thing.
it was also the days when the white fathers were still white fathers, as opposed to what is it now, the missionary society, the African Missionary Society, or something like that.
I'm really, I don't know what feeling I got, but I had as you recall my mentioning it, a very, very hard experience, difficult experience with Hawks. And I often wondered whether he was in charge of the newly ordained priests. He certainly was in charge of me when I refused to call and asked for at least a year in parishes so that I might understand the life of the priest more completely. And he was so angry and threatened me in so many ways and told me what I could and couldn't do. And then sent me to a very bland pastor who had been a wonderful man, but who was now just past, there was absolutely no direction. There was no, I mean, I was on my own. The only guy I really talked with was Father, who escapes me, the principal of
Kiefer.
Kiefer, Father Kiefer. Yeah. And he was just this very nice man who never wanted to get involved in any kind of politics. And so I've often wondered, what kind of man is this who has so much power? And I've just my own wonderments and talking with George, did they really know what they were doing, Cardinal McIntyre and Hawks? Was there some kind of synergy that went on between them, or did they operate, separately? And McIntyre did not know the nature and extent of Hawks' activities and craziness and hurtfulness. To send somebody for the first time to a guy like Osborne, I mean, what's he trying to do?
Well, wait a minute. Hawks was crazy like a fox. He did not necessarily have personal well-being uppermost in his mind. He had institutional efficiency in his mind. And institutional efficiency was achieved only through centralization. In other words, he had to be in control. And I think
And the almighty dollar.
and the almighty
Guys,
dollar.
Both he and McIntyre brought this sense of building an empire
Yeah,
and acquiring physical property and establishing physical plant, and then judging, in my opinion, the worthiness of those assigned to these physical plants as
Yeah.
custodians.
yeah. And, there was certain genius to that. I mean, when Manning replaced him, the archdiocese was and remained through Manning's time in extremely good financial order. Nobody really had to worry about paying for something. They might have to worry about whether it might get approved or not, but once it was approved, you had the money for it. And the farsightedness of buying property in godforsaken areas that very quickly became huge real estate developments was just absolutely amazing. And and so, yeah, you could, wherever people were settling, you could be assured that there was a well-funded established parish ready to go there. And there's a certain, I don't know, a certain missionary dimension to that also, even though
Yeah,
even though it was a rather narrow vision. But
I really have no quarrel in the least. In fact, I have great admiration for uh, the way McIntyre, he must have immediately made friends with, become allies with developers, people that knew about investments. I mean, he came apparently from
Oh, yeah.
that kind of background, and so he must have immediately allied himself so that he
Yeah.
might be able to do something like that.
Yeah.
But where so that's one dimension, and I thought it was a wonderful dimension. You know, parishes going up, schools going up, wonderful.
Yeah.
But what was the efficiency in putting you with Osborne?
Well, you know, there's
How was that good for
there's
you?
another little anecdote about that, because Sean Byron, the Spiritan priest, told me that Hawks told him that he was aware of Osborne's problems, particularly the fact that newly ordained priests did not do well there, and he would never send another newly ordained priest to Osborne. Within 6 months after that statement, Hawks had sent 2 newly ordained priests there. The other one was John Doyle.
Oh,
You
geez.
know him?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you know, he lasted just about 3 or 4. I think he survived through my time
Wait,
with Ozzy.
John
Johnny Doyle
Doyle,
from the class behind us?
Yeah.
No. John Doyle was an import from Ireland.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay.
oh.
Okay.
A very young, naive import. I
I
think I think he became a therapist. He's still living, I believe, in Orange County. I was in a little bit of touch with him at one time, but he had, you know, an even rougher time with Osborne than I did, because I think I had a couple of interests outside of dependence on parish structure for my priesthood and my ministry. For example, liturgy, and you know, I also was one of those 1 day a week notaries in the tribunal and that sort of thing. So, you know, there were a few things that sustained me outside of a parish. But somebody coming from Ireland with absolutely no support group except a few golfing buddies who would be, you know, similarly bitching about their own pastors, but not terribly, you know, bitching about their pastors, then having their happy hours. You know, I don't think he had any real support group or support network. But it's, you know, it's interesting, after declaring that he would never again send another newly ordained priest to Frank Osborne, he sends 2 within 6 months.
That's crazy.
Habits are hard to break.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I just want to put this out there to the group. My stomach is tightening up as I hear more and more about Hawks and McIntyre.
Same here.
I'm just getting very negative vibes and feelings that I don't think they deserve the time that they're getting here.
Oh.
Yeah, no, honestly, yeah, I'd rather hear Fred, you know, I'd rather be interested in some of your mentors or European influences, or, you know, when you went to Rome, you know, who, you know, what influenced you and so forth. So
Okay.
do we
Well,
want to move on to?
Take my
Yeah.
anecdotes for whatever they're worth, and let's let go of them and move on. There is no need to cancel them.
Sounds good.
We don't have to make them part of a cancel culture, but let's just
I
move.
would, I would like to start by saying I teach a course called Horizons in the Social Sciences. And it's a part of a 4-year program called Perspectives, and it's an alternative to the core. And the idea is that if people took all 4 years, they get a liberal education that they don't get from just distributing courses among fields that are considered liberal arts. And I happen to have to, when it comes to teaching about sociology, we study Max Weber. Max Weber has a genealogy of what he calls legitimacy. And legitimacy means what inspires people to obey people in authority. And it starts off with charismatic authority, like all religious founders. Probably that's the kind of pastor I think Tom was. And that's the kind of person Herbert was, and so forth. And then what happens is the charismatic leader dies, and there are the people who followed him who aren't charismatic, but hold up his traditions. So the next form of legitimacy is traditional. And traditional lasts for a while, but finally it gets replaced by bureaucratic setups. And modernity is the last stage of the stage we've been living through, and modernity is the stage of bureaucratic authority. And bureaucracy, according to Max Weber, is based on two things. On the one hand, it's based utterly and completely on power. And the other thing is it's based utterly and completely on covering your own ass. And so that's the system we were brought up in. That's the system which still dominates the church. And of course, people who don't operate that way, like I suppose I'm thinking that Pope Francis does not, because he came from Argentina, where they have that spirit of the Teología del Pueblo, that he's a little bit unbureaucratic. But one guy can't change everything. So anyway, that explains a lot of what you were hearing.
Mhm.
And it may explain some reason why some of you are no longer priests. But at any rate, for me, well, first of all, when I went over on my boat to Italy, we got off at Naples, and they send people to meet the boat. And the two people who met the boat right off the bat were these two very skinny, more or less sickening looking people named Joseph Kamanchak and David Tracy. And they both made the joke that they sent them because they were the healthiest. As it worked out, they do a sort of a little entertainment ride on buses. And during these rides, I had the pleasure of sitting next to Kamanchak and Tracy. And of course, I had started reading Lonergan, and I had just found out on the boat that Lonergan was going to be teaching at the Greg. And they were both already enthralled with Lonergan. And so they became my friends right off the bat. And so I think I may have already told you that after a while, when I had a lot of different questions, partly in relation to our course, but partly in in relation to thinking about things myself. He finally told me, well, go see Lonergan and ask him. So I finally did. And did I tell you that how our
Yeah.
first meeting?
Yeah. uh-huh.
Okay. I told him I wanted to go on a binge. And he would ask at different times, are you still on a binge?
You never
My,
got off it, huh?
my parents were alcoholics, so I knew the meaning of the term. So
Oh,
at any rate, um,
Oh, Fred, by binge, you meant you started taking all of Lonergan's courses?
well, that was part of it. And then also I started reading things that I thought were worth reading rather than going to the courses at the Greg, because they were all repeating their books. And I realized that I knew how to read,
Just read the book, yeah.
read the books. I didn't.
Hey, Sam
it takes
Harrison.
a
So-
lot less-
Hey, Jordan Peterson. Read
So,
Insight by Bernard Lonergan.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Sorry, I've
So-
got something else in here.
So at any rate,
First, thank you to Harrison Peterson. You two are willing to talk to each other in the spirit of inquiry. That's important. Also, thanks to Weinstein and Murray.
oh, you should turn off your audio for a minute.
I've got to, yeah, I've
That's
got,
important.
well, I can mute, okay,
Okay,
for the
So-
moment.
it's
many
gone.
times when I asked Lonergan questions, he would ask me, did I read some book in German? Could I read German? He'd forget from time to time that I always answered no, but I read Spanish and they translate pretty well. But at any rate, I started to realize if I was going to be serious about theology, I better get to know the German context. And I'm not a very organized person, but I got to have a meeting with Lukas Fischer, who was the head of the World Council of Churches at the time. And he spent some time with me, and I asked him, well, I need to learn the German context. What university would you recommend? And he said, I recommend the place I went which was the University of Basel. And the year I went to the University of Basel, Karl Barth, who had had a stroke, came out of retirement and taught for 4 semesters in my beginning time there. 2 of the courses would be on conciliar documents, Dei Verbum and Lumen Gentium, and the other courses would be on Protestant classics, Calvin and can't remember his name, the famous liberal who wrote The Christian Faith. I can't remember his name right now, but at any rate, so I got to hear him and the way he thought about things, and I was really impressed. But a thing he constantly stressed, which is what I realized was the thing I should practice. He would do it, especially in regard to reading the Catholic documents. You have to make the best of it, and he always said it in English: "Make the best of it." And I realized that's the way to read people. And I also, it kind of dawned on me that that's what Lonergan did, because many times he says he learned this from this author and that from that author. And when I studied those authors, I realized, well, he not only read them, but he made the best of them. He figured out the best possible meaning that he could live with for that person, and he didn't bother controverting with them and so forth. So then I when I was searching for a dissertation topic, I'd remembered that when I was at the Greg, I went to Lonergan's courses on method and theology, and he was often referring to a German guy named Gadamer. And so when I went to Rome, I thought I would do something on Runner or Runnerian. But as time went on, I realized that the problem with Runner and Runnerians is they're involved too much in metaphysics. And metaphysics leaves you high and dry. It's not really truly based on the experience of interiority. And Lonergan says you start with interiority. You have to appropriate the dynamisms of your own conscious intentionality, and everything unfolds from there. And then since he liked Gadamer so much, I realized, well, I'd like to study Gadamer, but by that time I knew that he was a student of Heidegger. And as a student of Heidegger, he started off his academic career, especially as a specialist in Plato. So I knew I had to study Heidegger first, which I did. And then I decided I'd go ahead, and Gadamer wrote this book called Truth and Method, Wahrheit und Methode. And I chose that as my dissertation topic. And when I went to the guy who was going to be the supervisor of my dissertation, he said, "Aber Herr Lorenz, ist das Theologie?" And I had to admit it wouldn't be Theologie. So I wrote a dissertation, which turned out to be two dissertations, one on Gadamer's way of talking about passing on the tradition, mediating between the old and the new. And then in order to make it theological, I did the second half of the dissertation on Lonergan, who made this transition between the old and the new based on interiority. So Gadamer was the same way when it came to reading. Make the best of it. And so that got drilled into my head. Those were very important mentors. But David Tracy and Joe Komonchak remain my friends for up until now. And that's the way they read people. Joe was a great ecclesiologist at Catholic U, and David Tracy started at Catholic U and went to the University of Chicago Divinity School. And they have been my advocates and mentors really throughout my life. So I'm very, very indebted to them. Then you realize that most of the great theologians of the 20th century were in Europe. So you couldn't be in Basel without you're in the same hometown as Hans Urs von Balthasar. And Balthasar was also a tremendous influence upon me. One of my colleagues was doing a dissertation on him and would invite Balthasar, and whenever he invited Balthasar to his home, he also invited me. And I read all of his works and was greatly influenced by him. Once again, a polymath who seems to have read every person of importance that ever lived, almost. Just an incredible. Lonergan said when he was on the International Theological Commission with him, that he just was amazed at the erudition of Balthasar. So those are some of the high points. The other thing is that studying in a place like Basel, it's small, it's it's really has high quality professors, but also the relationships you could have with fellow students were unlike anything you would have had at the Gregorian, where you're teaching people from 80 nations. And under the seminary system, you recall the seminaries always discourage personal friendships.
Yes,
They also made the schedules such that you could hardly have a personal friendship. Although this makes me recall one of Ted Howard's heroes, as he himself admitted, was Tom Horan, and I was a good friend of Horan. And when he decided to run for student body president, he asked me to go around with him and tell him what he should say when he gives his little speech. So, we had a long walk all around the junior seminary while because for 5 years, I was the class president of my class. And so I don't know, I wasn't sure why he asked me, but he did. And later on, one of his really good friends named Tom Porter said, "Boy, Tom Horan really thinks a lot of you. And thanks for helping him." But anyway, when he gave his speech, it had nothing to do with what I told him. He still became the student body president because I think because of his athletic prowess, people.
Yeah, he probably didn't have to say much.
yeah, there was a charisma there, wasn't
That's correct, yeah. And also, what I remember about the meeting where he gave his pitch, he asked Tom Cotton to play the piano as a prelude and afterward to his little talk. I think that had a lot to do with this.
You know, I vaguely remember. So I was a total Haran groupie. I mean, as much as Ted was, and just being deflated after his campaign kickoff oration. It was just sort of nice guy jock stuff, wasn't it? Am I right? Does anybody else remember?
Yes,
I was
yes,
very
absolutely.
underwhelmed, I think.
That's what he was.
Well, my sense is that he more or less said that he didn't know what to say.
Yep.
it?
Or, yeah, something like that.
He
I
was
don't-
just being himself and
Correct.
that's all he needed.
Yeah, that is all he needed.
So I was kind of a part of this, right, what I call the seminary jockocracy.
Well, I realized in reading Ted's book, you were on the what do you call it? Sports commission or the
Yeah,
Board, yeah.
yeah,
sport board? What do we call it?
that's right. That was
On the
it.
board.
Yeah, like every year, Fred, right?
Yeah, very, very many years.
Hmm.
So anyway,
You know, it's what's interesting as you're talking along these lines, I'm realizing how assiduously, and I'm sure there are other words to describe that too, I totally avoided the jock culture, which is probably one reason why almost all of the people that you are talking about, I guess I have to say, including yourselves, were a little bit on the periphery of my own consciousness. Now, I had my own circle of friends who tended not to be in that jock culture. I'm thinking of Dave Shaw and
God rest him. Good man.
yeah, and you know, that crowd. And I'm just realizing, okay, the other side of that is I was on the periphery of what was probably part of the mainstream seminary culture.
Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tom, because I have no memory of Tom Horan's talk, or I don't know what you're talking about, I think I have a between position. I played on Barney Gatlin's football team, on basketball, and played tennis with Gary Neer, but I wasn't in the top tier group of sports. So sports wasn't preeminent for me either. So I know Tom Horan, but he wasn't big on my radar either. So I'm kind of over towards Tom Welber's position, slightly to the center. Yeah.
I think one of the advantages that I had was that I genuinely liked and cared for people who weren't jocks. And I really thought when you first talked about mentors that I should mention what is also true is that in my last years at the seminary, I would have to call Mike Malloy a mentor. He was really important for me. He had a lot of the same questions I had, but his grandmother was a choir master and organist in the Catholic Church, and very introduced Michael to music in a way that had never been true for me, and all kinds of things. But he was also a person who was full of wonder,
Mm.
and really liked to talk about important matters. So I had a wonderful friendship with him, and that had a big influence on me too. In other words, it really opened me up to different worlds that I was not terribly at home in. But I really loved becoming acquainted with them. I always remember one time at his house, they had a record player, and he put on a record of a Bach, a violin concerto with 2 violins, and he asked me to listen to it, and I did. And he said, "Do you hear how the one violinist? They were 2 great, those Jewish violinists of that time, 2 great violinists." And he said, "Do you hear how the one violinist is outplaying the other?" And I said, "No, I didn't hear that." And it reminded me of having a friend who was interested in cars, who would pass a car that was idling as we'd be walking by. And he'd say, "Do you hear how this or that is happening in that car?" I'd say no. But he picked up the needle and put it back. And when they started playing, he said, "Now listen. Now there's the one who's not playing the same way as the other one." And when he told me about it, I could hear it. And it's the same thing when he would talk about things in literature or painting or whatever. It really changed my life. So he was an important mentor for me too. And I should
Wow.
mention that because
Maybe we should go back and try to get Mike Malloy, whoever, Fred, I think somebody invited him to be a guest, but maybe if whoever calls Mike says Fred Lawrence said you were his mentor, we'd like to hear more about your mentors. Maybe he'd come and be a guest.
that would be interesting.
Yeah, wouldn't that be cool, Fred? Find out.
If you
Yeah.
want.
Who is, I'm not, but who is in touch with him?
John is. John
Much myself, yeah.
Yeah. John, who is in touch with everybody.
Yeah, well, Betty and I were, we have a sort of a place in Maui, or a 12th of a place. And we decided one year to get together with Michael Malloy and his spouse, Tom. And we spent the whole day with him over there on Oahu. And this was perhaps 10 years ago, I don't know. And it was fascinating. I had always liked Michael a lot, but I didn't know him well. And I got to know him better in this day than I had in, 8 years with him.
Mhm.
But I remember him saying that he was at Collegeville, Minnesota. He was going to be a Benedictine after leaving St. John's. And he discovered LSD while he was in the novitiate and was not shy about its use at all, as it had mystical experiences on it. And he said at one point, wait a second. Now I'm higher than a kite on LSD, but this is a bona fide, truly profound mystical experience I'm having in this, I think it was an apple orchard. And all I had to do that was take this tab. And if I did it the traditional Catholic way I've been trying, I'd have to spend years to get to this state. Oh, to hell with that. I'm out of here, And that
Off
was
to Hawaii.
pretty much the way he told the story. And it was just so
So he-
funny.
So he flew over to Hawaii with Tim Leary next to him,
Well,
who also had a similar experience. Yeah.
he got to know, not Leary, he got to know Aldous
Right.
Huxley.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
Uh,
Ram Dass too. Who knows?
I don't know about that, but
Yeah.
Aldous Huxley, he was living in Hollywood and I think he was dying, and I'm not sure that. And Michael would go see him and talk and all about Brave New World, and Huxley had used LSD, and so anyway, I mean, Michael's fearless. He was fearless intellectually.
Although I have to share with you, my ex-wife Kathy and I won a trip to Hawaii, and so we went, and I looked up Michael, and this is like 30 years ago or something, and he graciously met us and took us on a tour around the island. And as we were finishing up, he told us he was not going to join reunions or connections for fear he'd be rejected as a gay man, and then introduced us to his partner. And somehow, God bless her, I think Kathy disabused him of that in that visit. And he did open up then, but I think his gay lifestyle, in his opinion, would cause him to be rejected by classmates.
Well, Vic Clore, do you remember him?
Who, Fred?
From
Vic?
American College. He was a few years ahead of me and a close friend of Rick Cassidy's. Anyway, he was teaching at Mercy College, the Jesuit university in Detroit, and he sent me the first edition of Mike Malloy's book on world religions, and lo and behold, it was dedicated to Fred Lawrence, who
Wow.
opened my mind.
Really? Wow.
Wow.
But not quite in the way that LSD did.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go, but you know what I've taken out of this session is what a difference it makes, Fred, in your case, who you sat to in that boat in Naples and the tab that Mike Malloy took and up
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Minnesota that's saved him of all those years, Benedictines. Yeah.
You know what we have
What a
there?
difference a tab makes, huh?
What a difference.
What a difference a tab makes.
Well,
Um,
and the role of turning points.
Yeah,
Yes.
turning
Yeah,
points. That's
yeah.
right.
Yes.
Sure.
You know, when Betty and I were with those two guys, Tom, the spouse, was not at all shy, not at all absent. So Michael had gotten past that time. And they told a story that I'm still laughing at. It's the funniest thing. They got very involved with trying to get the Bishop of Honolulu not to oppose the gay marriage or same-sex marriage struggle that was then going on in the Hawaiian Islands. They were way ahead of us on the mainland in that, you know. And and this bishop, whose name I can't remember, but I know of him otherwise, was kind of quite conservative. But he saw them, you know, he agreed to meet with them. So here Michael and Tom talking to the bishop, and the bishop's very harumphy about what the church teaches. And we know we can never agree not to oppose this. And then Tom says to the bishop, but Your Excellency, why not? I mean, we have to face the fact that our current Holy Father, John Paul II, is clearly the first heterosexual pope of this century. And they said that the bishop tried to keep a straight face and then just lost it. Just, I don't, it was like he hit the floor. But he just couldn't stop laughing at that. And I asked Herbert when we got back, I said, Herbert, could there be any truth in this? And Herbert said, no, George, I think John the 23rd was also a heterosexual.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Yeah. Well, Fred, you know, your class, Larry Shelburne went to a class reunion back in Chicago at Jim Dalton's house. And he was reluctant to go, but he found, Larry wasn't gay, but when he got together there were gay classmates from the Rome group, and Larry just said there was such a total acceptance of all kinds of pathways and varieties of things. I don't know if you went to that, Fred, or if you've had that experience, but Larry's experience was so positive. The first time he'd gone to it many years, he was already at the beginning stages of ALS, and he had his son go along with him in a wheelchair. But Larry was totally bowled over by the positive ambiance that was there, exhibited towards everybody. Fred, I don't know if you have anything to say to that, but maybe John, you could mention that to Malloy, that I don't think there'd be a problem here with us.
Oh, I don't think he.
I don't think there is anymore.
Oh,
Yeah.
At
we
all.
flew in it.
That was many years ago.
okay, yeah.
Could I interject that we've gone, a little bit
Yeah.
beyond 2
Right.
hours. George Farrick has to leave. I'm going to have to leave very, very shortly. I wonder, shall we call it quits with a promise for next week?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Can
And
I
I'll
ask-
step out and invite Mike.
Can
That
I
would
ask
be
a
great.
quick question? Just a quick question. The church has changed on its experience of and teachings about sex so much. And to the degree that it hasn't, is discredited and mocked and despised in our culture. Should we talk about that sometime?
Fine with me.
See what happens.
Sure.
I think it's an important thing to talk about because it's I don't see how the church is changing And Francis is doing best he can. Anyway, I agree.
Yeah, it seems to be changing without changing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're well put, Todd. Very good.
That's fine with me too.
Okay,
Yeah.
Bravo. On that happy note,
until next week,
God bless.
adios to everybody.
okay,
Bye.
Bye-bye.
bye.
Blessings, everybody.